Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was a Green Party candidate for and the Socialist Party candidate for the president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate around the eco-social program that my running mate Angela Walker and I ran on in 2020. So today, while we speak, I got a split screen up here. The Green National Convention, the Presidential Nominating Convention is going on. And I'll say a few words about that up front, and then maybe we can talk about that. Jill Stein is scheduled to give her nomination speech here, and maybe we'll just tune into that, and I'll try to, blast it out from the other side of the screen. So I think the drama around the convention was who was Jill Stein going to appoint to be her vice presidential candidate. And it turns out it's a man named Butch Ware, or he's a professor at UC Santa Barbara, doing African studies, Black studies, Islamic studies, history of colonialism, and that kind of thing. And so they were scrambling to get somebody. The background is they did want Abed Ayoub, who was the executive director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. And he had agreed, but then someone got a terminal illness in his family and he had to pull out. So then they had the idea of running a slate of candidates, different candidates in different states for vice president. Among them were Shama Samant, although there's a problem. She was born in India, so she's not legally qualified to be the vice president. But they did check in at least one state, that Washington state, she could, that's her home state, they would put her on the ballot. So she could run, but she couldn't serve if elected, which is a hypothetical. Another one was Jaime Gonzalez, who is a immigration and civil rights lawyer in Los Angeles, long active in the Chicano movement. Another one was Tara Haska, who is a White Earth Chippewa in Minnesota, and she wanted to focus on campaigning among indigenous people. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, you can't substitute the nominated candidate for the one that was on the petition, who I believe in Minnesota was LeBeau Capadu, who's a Green in Florida. I ended up on the ballot with Jill Stein for vice president in 2016 because we couldn't do the substitution. So that would have been a problem for Tara. And then there were three Palestinians that were in the mix. One was Amir, what's his last name? Something like Shah. He is a stand-up comedian, Palestinian-American, who had been a surrogate for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020, but now he's supporting Jill Stein. And then there was Nora Ericott, who is a law professor at Rutgers and a very active Palestinian-American. I really like her. She's got good politics on international questions. She's not a campist. She's an internationalist. But, and you can look up on her Twitter stream. Nora is Noura, Ericott is Erakat. And she explains that she was interested, but she wanted the Stein campaign to stand down if the Democrats agreed to a permanent ceasefire and an arms embargo on Israel. The chances of that are pretty minimal, but the Stein campaign, the Green Party couldn't go along with that. I agree with that. If you're going to run, you got to be serious and run and say you're the best candidate. And, you got to, work for those, all those Greens that work to put you on the ballot and want to have a vote for what they want. So that fell through. She would have been a strong candidate if it wasn't for that position she took. So then they were kind of scrambling around and stumbled upon, at the recommendation of another Palestinian American named Mark Alborno, who said they should check out Butch Ware. And they had a conversation earlier this week and came together in a week, which he gave a great speech last night during the announcement. He's very passionate and he's very clear in when he speaks. You know, the thing that wonders is, yeah, the phone in the background. I see that. I will turn it down. I've got the split screen going on, so I'll turn down the volume and hopefully be able to follow it by eyesight. So I'm getting the audio settings. There's audio settings, and so now I can't. So it shouldn't be distracting. But what I hope to do is, if Jill Stein is giving her speech, I will pump up the volume and we can all listen to it and then talk about it. But right now they're debating whether other people that want to speak as candidates who haven't met the normal criteria can get on the can speak to the convention and ask for the nomination. And I don't think that is going to happen, but that's what they're going through right now. So I was explaining how we got to Butch Ware as our vice presidential candidate. And so I was saying he gave a, very passionate and speech with a lot of clarity on the issues last night. I think in terms of presentation, he's a great candidate. The one thing I'm a little worried about is we're just getting acquainted and all of a sudden he's our vice presidential candidate. But under the circumstances, I guess that's the best the campaign could do. And now we're going to have to, work with that. So let me look at my screen here. Okay. So that's how we got to Butch Ware. And I got a message from the campaign manager, Jason Call. He said it last night. I didn't get back to him this morning that Butch Ware would like to come on this podcast at our earliest convenience, which would be next Saturday. So we may have the vice presidential candidate for the Green Party on this podcast next week. And I'm looking at the convention screen and I see the Jill Stein logo. I don't know if that means she's speaking. Let me just turn it up for a second.
And I think that
Nope, they're debating this, whether anybody else gets to ask for the nomination, I think. So what else? The other thing going on is there's a side chat on the question of safe states, which was a big issue in 2004 in the Green Party between David Cobb, who did get the nomination, and Ralph Nader. Cobb had talked about a safe state strategy, and then he changed it to strategic states, and then he ended up having to campaign in the so-called swing states or battleground states because the Greens in those states wanted him. So for that point of view alone, the safe state strategy doesn't work because Greens don't want to just abandon the campaign after working to get our ticket on the ballot. And my basic answer to that question is no state is safe. No state is safe from climate change or from austerity at home and militarism abroad. All our issues, we're not safe in a safe state any more than in a battleground state. So we need to advance our program. And how can we tell voters we're serious when we won't campaign in the states where our vote might make a difference because it splits the center and left vote and elects the right? And of course, that's another problem we got an answer to. It's ranked choice voting for president. And if you drop out, and this is my problem with what Noura Erakat was thinking, the minute you drop out, the pressure is off. So the Democrats can say, okay, we're going for a permanent ceasefire and we're going to do an arms embargo. And then they'll delay, but you've already dropped out. How can you drop back in? So it just doesn't work strategically from my point of view. And then they're just practical things like in about 40 of the states, and in the last ballot access news, they had a list of these states. The votes you get in a presidential year, which could be for president or it could be for another statewide office, can determine whether you have a ballot line in the next election cycle. So that's just a practical reason why even in the so-called battleground states, we need to keep running our candidates. So I gave you my side of that. I mean, of course, the other side is, well, the Harris campaign is not as bad as Trump. Trump's a disaster. So in the safe states, we should stand down and let people vote for Harris. But I think, for the reasons I just gave, that doesn't work. So looks like they're still debating whether to let anybody else ask for the nomination. So I didn't prepare a lot today because this convention's going on. And looking at the questions, I don't know if we got, let's see, what do we got for questions and comments? Yeah, Rob Rich asks if I'm coming to Chicago. I'm not coming for the Democratic convention. I'm coming to Chicago Labor Day weekend, shortly thereafter, for the Socialism 2024 conference, which will have several thousand people debating, what the left should do. I'm involved in 2 workshops related to Ukraine. I'll be tabling for the Ukraine Solidarity Network and trying to take in as many other workshops as I can. So that's when I'm getting to Chicago. Yeah, Rob says, okay, via email, comments on the DNC in Chicago, including the historical context of the '68 convention. It's going to be very different. The police are a lot more prepared. They're going to keep the demonstrators distant from the convention, so there won't be the kind of interaction there was in '68. Hopefully the police are smarter than they were in '68. I mean, that was a police riot. They were just beating up on demonstrators, even delegates to the Democratic convention. It was terrible. And Mayor Daley was a, fascistic pig when it came to how they treated the protesters. And I think Jacob Javits, who then was a senator from New York, told Daley as much to his face in the convention. And Daley, shouted back at him. And if you read his lips, he was saying, "Fuck you." So I think it's going to be a lot more orderly. There will be a number of protests. There's one going on tomorrow. I think it's at 4:00. It's by a group. I forget the name of it. It's, something about our bodies, but it's for abortion rights. It's for the rights of LGBTQ people and against the genocide in Gaza. And the Green Party has endorsed that demonstration. And then on Monday, there's the Poor People's Army, which Sherry Honkala heads up out of Philadelphia. She was the Green Party vice presidential candidate in 2012. And they do have a permit, as does the one today, or on Sunday. And, they are going to try to make a citizen's arrest of some of these war criminals going to the Democratic convention. They're not going to get close enough to do that in all likelihood. I expect Sherry and some others may get arrested trying. And I know Jill Stein will be there. A lot of Greens will be there. The Greens have endorsed that demonstration as well. And then there's a coalition led by the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, which is a very campus organization, against the war and genocide in Gaza, which is good, but in the fine print, they are against solidarity with the Ukrainians fighting the Russian invasion, which is problematic. So they haven't got endorsements from the internationalist section of the left. And they expect 25,000 people. We'll see if they pull that. I would be surprised if they pull that many. The Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee and the Rainbow Coalition are doing 3 days of conferencing, highlighting the issue of Gaza, not at the convention, but in Chicago. And, it should get some media coverage. I'm probably leaving something out. Oh, Shama Sawant's group, Workers Strike Back, is having Jill Stein and Nick Cruz from the Revolutionary Blackout Network, who I think is a mistake to have invited. That last guy, he's a conspiracy nut. He's a Jimmy Dore wannabe. But that's what it is. Jill will be there. This is Shama's thing. And that's Wednesday night. It's a kind of a rally. So that's what I know is going on. I don't think any of them are going to have the impact on the convention like the demonstrations in '68 did. But that doesn't mean people shouldn't be out there raising the issue of Gaza. I think the bigger disruption may come from the uncommitted delegates inside the convention. And it'll be interesting to see what they do to try to raise this issue. And I have not followed. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I know the uncommitted delegation asked for two speakers, one about the issue and one a report by a physician who was in Gaza to tell people how bad it is there. And they were denied by, the Harris campaign people. So I'll be watching this week. I'll be curious to see what happens. But yeah, I think, that's the suspense. We know who's going to be nominated. The question is how much this issue of Gaza, which is the real contentious issue, is going to be raised, and what kind of response there'll be. How is, the Harris campaign going to handle that question? And, it's an important issue for them in their election. Like in Michigan, a close state, there's a lot of Palestinian and Arab Americans in that state, and they're not happy with what the Biden position has been, and they want to hear what Harris has to say. And is she going to say enough to get their votes? So let's go on to more questions and comments. Scout Trooper 164, is it any surprise Tim Walz is more popular than Harris? His career record is far cleaner than anything she's done. I'm not aware of the polling showing that, but I'll take your word for it. Part of this is he's, a new face, so people haven't scrutinized what he's done. I think his basic biography is appealing to people, a school teacher, a football coach, National Guard, 24 years. Was it National Guard or Army Reserve? Anyway, 24 years in the service before he ran for Congress. And when he was, what brought him to my attention was when the Democrats got both of the houses in the Minnesota legislature, Walz passed or signed a law for more progressive taxation, which enabled them to pay for things like free school lunch for all school children, and some other care economy benefits. And when it happened, I remember he was asked, and he said, it's simple. You tax the rich; they can afford to pay more. And that gave me a positive feeling about him, as as much as you can get for a liberal Democrat. So that's what I know about him. And Harris definitely has a mixed record as a prosecutor, as a senator, as a presidential candidate, and she's backed down. When she ran for president, she started on the progressive lane with Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and then that was crowded, so she moved more to the right, but not all the way over to Biden. So she was kind of putting out, mixed up, watered down versions of the progressive policies. But she did have a Medicare for All plan that was problematic because of the compromises. She called for a ban on fracking. She came out, she didn't run from the Green New Deal in her primary campaign. She did when she joined Biden's campaign. And when you look at what she proposed $10 trillion over 10 years. That was more than anybody but Bernie Sanders, who proposed $16 trillion. Our eco-socialist Green New Deal budget was for $42 trillion, $27 trillion for the ecological conversion and to green energy, and $14 trillion or $1.4 trillion a year for the social benefits of the Economic Bill of Rights. So the problem with Harris's program, it was about $1 trillion in public money that was supposed to incentivize another $9 trillion in private investment, which was something you can't count on. Incentives, they're incentives, they're not guarantees. Sanders was much more public spending, almost all public spending. Of course, our program was as well. So, but she's backed away from that. So I think what we can expect, we saw this with her economic program announced yesterday. There'll be some tinkering at the edges, a little bit more liberal, but nothing fundamental or structural. She's going to just try to not be controversial and get elected. And then when she's in office, I think actually on the economic issues, she may be weaker than Biden, who kind of had decided he was going to be, Joe from Scranton and, representing the workers and the unions. I think she comes more from the upper middle class social liberal tradition of, liberal, progressive on social questions related to gender and race, and sexual orientation, but pandering to the corporate interests that back the Democratic Party. So anyway, so that's what Harris and Waltz look to me like at this point. The Green Garrett. Wisconsin Democrats are trying to kick Stein off the ballot like they did to you in Pennsylvania, and they did to me in Wisconsin, and they did to me in Montana, other states in 2020. Do you think it will be successful? Well, last night the election board said that the objection of the Democratic member of the Democratic National Committee, they would not accept. The objection was there were no public officials on the Green electors slate. And apparently the complaint referred to some rule or law in Wisconsin, but the board, which knocked me off the ballot, did not accept this complaint. So Jill is still on. The Democrats are appealing, and the latest news is there's another lawsuit or petition to the election board coming from the Democrats. So yeah, they're trying to kick Jill off the ballot in Wisconsin, but last night they had a defeat, but they haven't stopped. So I guess stay tuned on that. Via email. Thoughts on RFK making offers to Trump and Harris? Yeah, RFK is a what's the word? He's a caricature of himself. He is, he started out running as a Democrat, then he ran as an independent, and he made all these, appeals to the far right on the border, on Israel, not to mention vaccines. And then Trump called him and saying, endorse me and I'll give you a cabinet position. And he wasn't ready to do that. And then he contacted the Harris campaign and said, I'll drop out if you give me a cabinet position. Well, he wanted to do that, but the Harris campaign wouldn't answer his phone call. So I just see an opportunist and a guy that's, Waltz popularized the term weird for the Republicans. You can apply that to RFK Jr. as well, I think. It's just weird. But I don't think either major party is taking him very seriously now. His poll numbers, were up around 15, 20% early on. Then they were around 10% when Biden handed the torch to Harris, and he bumped up for a minute. Well, yeah, for a minute, for a day or two to maybe 15% again. And then he's down around 5% or below in all the polls now. He's sinking. And I think he's going to be a afterthought. And the people who are sticking with him are people when he's on the ballot, in the polls, when they add him as an option, those votes are coming more from Trump than Harris. So that's what it looks like now. But he's going to not get a big percent of the vote, I think. Scout Trooper 164. The fact that Ukraine has managed to conquer more territory in less than 2 weeks compared to Russia in 6 months is a hell of an accomplishment. Any thoughts on their success thus far? Well, it's a big risk. The underlying thing is Russia's got much bigger population from which to draw troops to send in as cannon fodder. And unless the West steps up more in its arms to Ukraine, Russia has more artillery and air power to throw into this war. That's the big picture. Now, this move by Ukraine has really upset things in Russia. And it's, among other things, a probe to see how stable the Putin power structure is. Because in what I've been reading, a lot of the military bloggers who are Russians who tend to support the war and are critical because it's not aggressive enough against Ukraine are very unhappy with the military hierarchy and how it's handled this. Those are the kind of people that supported Prigozhin, who had that ill-fated mutiny last year. So that's one thing to watch. And I won't go into the details, but you look at the military maps, because of a sizable river that will be a good natural barrier. Ukraine may be able to button down and hold this territory for right until the winter, which will be a big psychological blow for Russia and uplift for Ukraine. I've been talking to people in Ukraine, over the last several months, and they are as opposed to Russia's invasion as ever, but they've been discouraged and demoralized, particularly when the U.S. held up those arms. But still now, because, the war goes on, they're losing people. And this has been a psychological uplift. And, it's at least had the Ukrainians feel better about themselves. I think it also has a political impact on the West. It's a narrative in the West that Ukraine can't win, so we should push them to compromise with Russia and give up territory to Russia. And the fact that Ukraine made this bold military move, and so far successfully, undermines that narrative. And, maybe Ukraine can win. So that could bolster, support from Western Europe and the United States and Canada for Ukraine in terms of military support. Those are kind of the possibilities. And, we'll have to see how it plays out. Russia's been slow to mobilize a force that can uproot the Ukrainians from their foothold in the Kursk Oblast in Russia. They've taken forces reportedly from Kharkiv, where the Russians tried to make a new assault on Ukrainian territory in the Kharkiv Oblast, and they got stalled. Ukraine has pushed them pretty close all the way out of Kharkiv. So they pulled some troops from there, as well as from Zaporizhia in the south, where there's been ongoing skirmishes, but not the kind of push you see from the Russians in eastern Ukraine, where they are closing in on an important city, small city, town that is a hub for the logistics for Ukraine. That's important. And that's actually the battle that probably matters most at this point. Although it's not getting a lot of coverage in the media because this Kursk thing has jumped to the front of these stories on Ukraine. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that incursion of Ukraine into Kursk Oblast in Russia. Andrew Hager, thoughts on China in the Congo, exporting raw materials from cheap labor. Yeah, it's classic neo-colonial imperialism. It's Chinese corporations, go back, when the US and Belgium had Lumumba assassinated because he wanted to nationalize their raw materials and have them benefit the development of Congo. The West thought they'd cash in. Ironically, today it's Chinese capitalists that are cashing in. And, they don't treat their labor any better than Western capitalists. And they're not intervening militarily, but they're relying on, other countries, supporting Congo or, they're in Katanga province. There's also, that's in the southeast. And then in the northeast, there's a lot of fighting over that territory also for minerals. And the treatment of, the treatment of the labor is both environmentally or, occupational health problems, as well as, underpaid. So, what Lumumba proposed, it was 1960. What is that? 64 years ago, is still the program, basic program Congo needs to pursue. But because of the guy that named it Zaire, and I'm blanking on his name, but he was a total crook and ran the Congo as a colony for exploitation and cashed in with, billions of dollars stashed away in Swiss bank accounts. It's just the irony is that the West kind of set this up, and now China's taking advantage of it. Beloved community. Now Tulsi is coaching Trump. What a sellout. Yeah, there was some people on the banter on the chats. It's not the chats, it's on the Lumio platform where delegates, one or two delegates were saying before the vice presidential candidate was announced that Tulsi Gabbard should be the candidate. And they got a lot of pushback from people, including a guy in Hawaii who was in her district. So yeah, she's I think she was always well, she was always deferential to the the authoritarians like Modi in her country of origin, India, Sisi in Egypt, Assad in Syria. I mean, she was never really a progressive, certainly in terms of international affairs. And now, she's. I didn't know she was coaching Trump. I know she's been on Fox News and further to the right, but I'm glad she's not fooling a lot of progressives these days. Although apparently some, because a couple of Green delegates were supporting her in this debate, but not many. They got put down pretty quickly by a lot of people. Via email, have you been following the U.S. Senate debate in Arizona, race in Arizona, where the Greens won, but the Secretary of State declared a different winner, which they have now acknowledged was a mistake? Yeah, I did follow that. For people that haven't, the Greens decided they would run their own candidate in the primary as a write-in because the petitioning process to get on the ballot was onerous. And so apparently a Democratic front guy and a Republican front guy decided they would run as write-ins to try to steal the ballot line from the Greens. So our guy, Edward Quintana, had to campaign to get the write-in vote, probably do as much work as he would have had to do if he had petitioned to get on the ballot. And he won handily in the write-in, although because people, grassroots Greens who go to vote in the primary, they don't often follow this stuff closely. And so they were kind of guessing which candidate to vote for. But he won handily. And the Secretary of State, Arizona, at first declared one of the front candidates the winner. And Greens pointed that out and he acknowledged, whoops, yeah, the green won. So he will be on the ballot, Edward Quintana. And I don't know how that stands up for the Senate race in Arizona. You got Mark Kelly, I believe, running for re-election. He's the astronaut, was considered for vice president for Harris. And is it that woman that lost the governorship? She's a real election denier. Trying to remember her name. Lake, I think her last name is. I think she's the Republican. Okay, I see Jill Stein is speaking. So let me see if I can pump up the volume. We'll listen to what she has to say and then talk about it afterwards. Give me a second.
America and a world that works for all of us. As the Green Party and allies, we are more than the sum of our parts. In fact, we are unstoppable together. The Green Party is the one national scale, people-powered political vehicle for peaceful revolution, and the time for that revolution has come. That is why I am seeking your nomination for president. I ask for your vote today so we can meet this historic moment head on to transform the political landscape and reclaim the peaceful, just future we all deserve. In this moment of unprecedented crisis, we are the unstoppable resistance. We are a haven of humanity in an unraveling, depraved empire ruled by rapacious oligarchy, which has imposed existential crisis in virtually every dimension of our lives. The need for deep change has never been more urgent, but the possibility of that change has never been so close at hand. So we, the people, are rising up to end endless war and genocide abroad, to end crushing inequality, climate collapse, and rising fascism here at home and beyond, because we are done being thrown under the bus by bought politicians and the wealthy elites that sponsor them. The war profiteers, Wall Street, APAC, health insurance, big pharma, fossil fuels, and more. Over 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Half of renters are struggling to pay the rent. So many just a paycheck or two away from eviction. Homelessness is at record highs, and the unhoused are being criminalized simply for having nowhere to sleep. While countless millions are locked in student and medical debt, and half of youth are hopeless about the future, and the environmental crisis is accelerating over the cliff. And meanwhile, both parties just unimaginably are squandering trillions on the endless war machine fueling death and destruction around the world. The war abroad goes hand in hand with that war at home, which is a war on working people and a war on democracy. We must end all of these wars and end them together because they are joined at the hip. That's why we are in this election, to fight for working people and everyday Americans. We are the only pro-worker, anti-genocide climate emergency campaign already on the ballot for a majority of voters. In fact, it's well over 70%, and we're heading for at least 90%. And we are calling for an America that works for all of us, and we've got the solutions to achieve that right now, such as cutting by more than half the huge military expenditures, squandering over half of our congressional budget on the endless war machine, which is impoverishing and endangering all of us. And we will put that money instead into urgent needs here at home. We'll enact an improved Medicare for All system that covers everyone comprehensively. We will push back on the housing crisis with a national rent control program, a tenant bill of rights, and much more. We'll end the immigration crisis, starting most importantly by ending the policies, our policies, which have created the crisis in the first place. Instead of wasting billions on a border wall that doesn't work, we will instead put that money into the infrastructure we need here to screen and provide permitting rapidly so migrants can get to work, not only paying their way, but enriching our communities, making us more secure, safe, and prosperous. We will fight the climate crisis with a real Green New Deal on an emergency basis, cancel student and medical debt, begin a reparations program to pay debt long owed, and respect Indigenous rights and honor treaties and sovereignty. We will do this and more, and pay for these programs through health savings, through Medicare for All, by cutting the military budget, taxing the rich, and reviving a productive economy. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. We are that demand. It's time to stand up and make that demand. Thank you so much for being the team, for being the power that we all have together to create an America and a world that works for all of us. We are unstoppable together. Thank you so much.
Well, I wish they had given her more than 5 minutes. You know, she's been campaigning. People are familiar with what Jill has to say, but that was less time. I had a pre-recorded speech. It was 6.5 minutes long. That was broadcast earlier in the convention. And they asked me for 5, and I took 6.5. And David Doonan, who's the website manager for the Green Party, I said, "Is that going to be all right?" He said, "Don't worry about it." So I ended up speaking more than she did, at least initially. She'll do an acceptance speech when she gets the nomination. So let's see what y'all want to say about that. I saw some comments as it was going on in the chat. I saw a comment from Nada Barca, which I sympathize with. She says, "Is Putin giving up Ukraine? It's frustrating to hear all this talk of anti-imperialism and then not helping the Ukrainians resist the invasion and getting what's left of their economy parted out or parceled out to the International Monetary Fund." I mean, that is so on point. When people like me say we should support the Ukrainians in self-defense of their country from the Russian invasion, that doesn't mean we have to support the domestic policies of the Ukraine government, which are and to some extent being imposed on them by the West, by the conditions on the loans that Ukraine has taken. And, Ukraine has billions and billions of dollars of unjust debt. That debt should be canceled. So the anti-imperialist position is to tell the Russian troops to go home and tell the IMF and the bondholders, the private bondholders in the West to write off those loans to Ukraine so they can use that money to defend themselves and then rebuild their economy. The first question, is Putin giving up on Ukraine? I don't think so. I mean, he is, I think one consequence of this incursion is that to save face, he's not going to negotiate at this point because now the Ukrainians have more to bargain with. They've got hundreds of basically conscripts who didn't want to fight and border guards who weren't prepared to fight that were captured with this incursion, and they can be exchanged for, there's several thousand Ukrainians who the Russians hold as prisoners of war. And the Russians have not wanted to bargain on that. Now they don't want to trade land, Ukraine moving out of the Kursk region and Russia giving back some of Ukraine's land to it. That could be on the table in negotiations. But so at this point, I think Putin's not ready to negotiate. I think he's waiting to see if Trump gets elected. And then he's hoping, Trump will cut off U.S. arms to Ukraine and, screw things up in NATO and block with Orban in Hungary and make it harder for Ukraine to get weapons from Western Europe. So I think Putin's not giving up, but he's not winning either. I mean, the narrative you hear is Ukraine is losing. It's inevitable it's going to lose. When you think about it, half the land that Russia originally took in the initial invasion in 2022, Ukraine has got back. Now, the front lines have been pretty much frozen for the last year, but that in itself is a victory because Russia and Putin thought they'd be taking over Kyiv in a few days and installing a puppet government and annexing, the eastern and southern regions of what they call New Russia. And they haven't been able to do that. So he has not fulfilled his objectives. He hasn't won. And you could look at that as, he's losing. It's costing him enormous amounts of people and military hardware that's degrading his military. So unfortunately, he's not giving up, but he's not winning. At war with us. Back in May, Texas Republicans scoffed at hearing Trump described as part of the ruling class. What's your definition of the ruling class, and does that include Trump? Well, the ruling class is, the power structure is complicated. And you can read people like G. William Domhoff, or go all the way back to C. Wright Mills' book, The Power Elite. And there are fractions within it. Now, the dominant fraction, which would include Wall Street, some of the big industrial corporations, big tech, most of them are with the Democrats these days because Trump to them is destabilizing, and capitalists want a stable situation in which to do business. But there are factions of the ruling class, the capitalist class, who do support Trump. Some of them are on Wall Street because they want lower taxes. Some of them are in big tech in Silicon Valley because they want deregulation so they can move full speed ahead on artificial intelligence and, no kind of regulation for their social media platforms like Elon Musk buying, Twitter and calling it X. And then there's small capitalists, domestic capitalists who are just, right-wing and they like Trump's anti-labor positions. Although those small capitalists are really junior partners in the capitalist class. They're not in the ruling class. So, my definition of the ruling class is that part of the capitalist class that's got state power. And right now, that's the mainstream of the capitalist class using the Democratic Party as their vehicle. And they are not, traditionally, they've backed both parties, but Trump has just kind of gone off off the reservation as far as most of them are concerned, because you just don't know what the guy's going to say. He's ignorant, he's incompetent, he's lazy, and he's going to, who's he going to appoint? That's the big question. We know he's got a whole army of cadre ready to take office, purge the civil service and put his own hacks in there, head the agencies. But he's not doing that. It's, Project 2025 and, this right-wing infrastructure that's backing him. And he's just going to be a figurehead for that if that's what comes to pass. And they will become the ruling class, and it'll be fascistic, if not just fascist. So and the fact that Texas Republicans, there's a long thing about the right, even members of the ruling class, saying the elite are really the upper middle class people, the university professors and the journalists and the intellectuals, who do set, public agendas. They are influencers, but they're not decision makers. And that's, what the capitalists with state power through the Democratic Party and in the past the Republican Party do. I'm looking at the convention, and I want to see what this guy from Hawaii is saying, because I've been battling him over Ukraine on the national committee list. And see what
U.S. military out of Hawaii. Our 4 delegates of Hawaii vote for Jill Stein for president.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
They're doing the roll call vote now. So he was the reporter from Hawaii. And I don't have to worry about that because our votes are already counted by our reporter. So Vicki Corden asks, any thoughts about Kamala's economic plan for the country? I would say what I said earlier is that, it's a little more liberal around the edges, but it's nothing fundamental like Medicare for all. I didn't hear anything about, climate investments. Maybe it was in there. I haven't had time to, read the news stories on that. I did read a summary analysis by Matt Brunig of the People's Policy Institute or project. And I would urge you to look that up. I did read that, and he has, I think it's titled Good Ideas, Bad Ideas, Meh. So he goes through some of the things she proposed and does an evaluation. And he's a very sharp policy analyst. He did a lot of work for Bernie Sanders in 2020. And so a lot of the program on paper from Sanders was pretty good, including, as I mentioned, I think here, his climate program. And then when, Sanders lost, he contacted me and offered to help my campaign in 2020. And so I've had some communication with him. The way that campaign played out was, of course, by the time he contacted me, we were just totally committed to ballot access, which is a big burden. And, in my campaign, the Greens really didn't get out there until I got the nomination in the middle of July. So we were behind the 8 ball. And then it was COVID. And I wasn't getting much media attention. So, I've talked with Matt. He's helped me on a few things I needed to research. But I have a high respect for him. So I would urge you to look at his comments. And that's the People's Policy. I don't know whether it's Project or Institute, but if you Google People's Policy Project or Institute, you should get it. And it's something he posted yesterday. And, just thinking off the top of my head, he thought the child tax credit was good, except it should be paid out directly by the Social Security Administration instead of by Internal Revenue Service like they did during the COVID problem, which created a problem. Some of the benefits that Harris is proposing in the care economy are hard for poor people to take advantage because they have their refundable tax credits. And if you're not filing taxes because your income is too low, you're not going to have access to that. Those are the kind of things he knows. He's a real policy wonk. He knows the federal government and he knows these policies and how they work in practice. So I would say, check that out and, follow him. He's spending a lot of time now on the National Labor Relations Board, following their decisions, not so much on the policies. But this website is, very valuable when you want to think about particularly social policy and the care economy. He's, just about the best I've read about that. The link is in the chat. Great. Yeah, good. Scout Trooper 164. Thoughts on Tim Walz being criticized for dodging Iraq when he retired 2 months before his unit was sent? Just more disinformation the Republicans love to spew. Yeah, I'm a veteran, and however you served, if you served honorably, that's all that needs to be said. And for this guy, J.D. Vance, to try to disparage Walz for spending 24 years in the services is beyond the pale as far as I'm concerned as a veteran. And if I wanted to, we could talk about, well, what was J.D. Vance doing? He was a journalist. He was in an office. He was in Iraq. There's a chance, they could have been hit by a, missile or a, moving around by IUD, improvised explosive device, IED. But, it's not like he was out there, doing ground patrols and infantry, like he has so much more valor than Tim Walz. Tim Walz actually, he's disabled for hearing loss because he was in an artillery unit and, firing all those cannons artillery cannons in, practice and training damaged his ears. So, F J.D. Vance for bringing that up. Scout Trooper 164. Honestly, I wonder how J.D. Vance can convince people that he's good on policy when he can't stop the idea that he bangs couches. I hadn't heard that.
Hey folks, I don't know what just happened. Howie just dropped. But as usual, whenever this happens, he usually comes right back. So yeah. He will. He should be right back. There he is. Welcome back. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Suddenly, I lost it. My other screen with the Zoom to the Green Convention still working. So, okay, I was saying I hadn't heard that he bangs couches, and I was going to say he's got a lot of problems. He can't articulate a clear policy. He keeps telling jokes that are off color and aren't funny. His speech at the Republican convention was boring as hell. He's just a terrible candidate. I mean, that's his biggest problem. And he's good on policy. Well, he's extreme on policy to the extent he ever gets to it. Whether it's immigration policy or abortion rights, reproductive rights. I don't see how he's winning anybody to the Republican ticket that wouldn't have already voted for them because Trump is the candidate. And I can't see your comments because I was cut out. So Chris will have to put something up there for me to respond to. Oh, that's the the banner is to who I am. So I guess that means, oh, here we go. Scout Trooper 164, any thoughts so far on how Biden appears to be more verbally functioning compared to when he was still in the president race? Yeah, I thought his speech he gave a couple days ago with Harris, I guess, I forget what they were doing, is the best speech I've heard from him maybe ever. I mean, he was funny. He joked about his age, being too young when he was first elected to the Senate. Now he's too damn old. But in between, he did some good stuff. I thought that was good. And he just seemed to be a lot more articulate and, functioning verbally, right? And, I guess he's having his good days and his bad days. And hopefully he has good days when he's out there stumping for Kamala Harris. Maybe he's just getting a little more rest, or just not having to worry about the campaign is just making it easier for him to perform. But yeah, I thought this week he gave a really nice speech. It was I didn't see it, but I heard it on the radio while I was doing errands, and I was like, wow, that's not the guy who showed up for that debate. Nada Barker, what do you think about China abandoning their no first use nuclear policy? Yeah, that's one of the issues I tried to bring up when I ran in 2020, the new nuclear arms race, which the U.S. has major responsibility for, pulling out of the Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty under Bush, under the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty under Trump, and also then Russia pulled out of the Open Skies Treaty, which is about observing what each side is doing with their nuclear deployments. Now Russia won't negotiate on START until we stop aiding Ukraine. And so both the US and Russia are increasing their arms. And now China's saying, well, to defend ourselves, maybe we need more nukes, and maybe we should end our no first use policy. I don't think they've done it yet. Maybe they have, and you're more up to date than me. But one of the, if you could call it a good point in the nuclear situation up until now, was China and India had a no first use policy, and that's something we should be demanding that the U.S. government adopt. Obama considered it, but he got talked out of it. There's senators like Bernie Sanders and some others in the presidential race, I think Elizabeth Warren, who raised it, but it's got no traction in the Senate. And that's why, Jill is not talking a lot about the nuclear policy, but the platform gives her, the presidential candidacy gives her a platform in which to do that. And, I hope she will do some of that. The bigger problem is getting it into the mainstream media, the mass media. They are just kind of ignoring this issue. It should be a major issue, even if it's only Harris and Trump debating. It should be brought up in those debates. And, in 2020, it was never brought up in the primaries or the general election debates. So that's a huge issue. And, my basic position has been we should take nuclear disarmament initiatives, including no first use, get rid of our land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. They just make us a target. We don't need the air-launched intercontinental ballistic missiles. The submarines are sufficient for a deterrent. We should reduce to a minimum credible deterrent. And on the basis of initiatives like that, go to the other nuclear powers and say, we are no longer an aggressive nuclear power. We're not going to use our nukes like Putin is using right now to threaten people. And we have done in the past. Daniel Ellsberg used to talk about when you say all options are on the table and it implies nuclear power, it's like a mugger putting a gun to your head and saying, give me your money. He's using that gun even if he doesn't pull the trigger. We can go to other countries and say that's no longer our posture, and we want to get together and mutually get rid of all the nuclear weapons in the world and prohibit them, like this new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which over 100 countries have signed on to. Their governments have approved it, and now legislatures are approving it. And I think it's over 50. That should be the goal of U.S. Nuclear weapons policy. And the fact that China's thinking about abandoning its no first use should just be more stimulus for us to raise that issue. And I think it's going to be up to the Greens to raise it. And aside from the presidential race, I think our leverage in national policy is in the congressional districts. I mean, even this fall, in the, from now until the election, what is it, 78 or 77 days, we can bring this issue into, if we can't do it inside because of the format, outside candidate debates. We can demonstrate outside candidates' headquarters. This is even if we don't have our own candidate. We can write letters to the editor, leaflet, be an extra parliamentary force and make this issue an issue in congressional races wherever we are. And where we got a candidate, we got more leverage because we can bring it up in debates and editorial board interviews and that kind of thing. And, we can extend this extra parliamentary movement for nuclear disarmament into the electoral arena while keeping our base in the extra parliamentary movement, organizing in it, being accountable to it. That's the original idea of the Green Party as the movement party or the anti-party party. Unlike the traditional parties that get detached from the people, the Green Party ideas would be an extension of the people's popular progressive movements into the electoral arena without losing their character as a social movement and accountable to those movements. And what I argued, this is what I said in my pre-recorded convention speech, is that is how we're first going to be able to get influence in national policy, by making these issues in all our congressional districts, and by running candidates and building up a base of local candidates who elected the local office, state legislatures, and then to the House of Representatives. And we get a caucus in the House, and we will have influence. We'll be automatically in the mass media coverage. We'll be able to put our positions out there, win more support. And then even when we have a caucus in Congress or presidential candidate, will be taken much more seriously. So that's a long answer to, the nuclear question, but I wanted to talk about how we can inject it into the public debate, which is missing. That's what's frustrating. Okay, and now we've gone for an hour, so it's time to wrap up. I hope next week, if it works out from their end, that we will have Butch Wade, who is the presumptive nominee. It's not formal yet at the convention, on the podcast, and we'll have him say, give his stump speech, and then you can ask him questions or comment on what he's saying. So I hope that's the format next week. If not, there's Gaza, there's Ukraine, there's all the domestic issues, what is Harris's economic program? We can go into that in more detail. A lot of things to talk about. So either way, we will be here next Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, to live stream it. And for those of you listening on the podcast, it goes out Monday morning. So thanks for being here. And I'm going to go back to the convention. I guess they're still doing the roll call. So everybody have a good week. And, keep the faith, keep working, and we can make a difference.